We are setting parents up to fail every single day. And worst of all, not only are parents and amazing, caring, courageous moms, because this does not have to do with love or intelligence, we are setting teenagers up to fail.
Welcome to the Worthy Mother podcast. I'm your host, Emily Hardy, a mom of two on a mission to help moms everywhere feel less alone. This is not a parenting podcast. Instead, it's a space for pushing back against societal expectations of perfection and embracing self-compassion in your motherhood journey. Let's get into it. Hey, welcome back to Worthy Mother podcast. I am so excited to be here today for what I think is going to be a very insightful conversation. I have joining me Aly Pain. She is a parent coach who specifically works with moms of teens to heal emotional pain and create lasting connections with mutual trust and respect that can actually change their family for generations. But if you are not a mom of teens or you are not close to that period and it seems like this might be irrelevant, I want you to stop for a moment because that is not true. We are really going to be focused on the greater experiences and expectations that we have of ourselves as mothers and how we kind of fit into a greater societal narrative. And so no matter how old your kids are, this conversation is really going to be for you. And if you do happen to be a parent of teens or getting close to that stage, just know that Aly is a great resource for that. So Aly, welcome to Worthy Mother podcast. So happy to have you here. Can you just tell us about yourself, everything we need to know to kind of get a picture of who you are?
Absolutely. Well, first of all, thank you for having me. I love your podcast. We need more of support for moms because it's one of the hardest jobs in the world. I always tell people it's the hardest thing we're ever going to do for which there is zero training. That's one of the passions about why I do what I do. So yeah, my name is Aly Pain. And yes, that's Pain, like ouch, nothing fancy, no Y's, no E's. Yes, I am a pain. So it's a pleasure to meet you. Thank you for listening if you're tuning in today. I work specifically with parents of teens. My business is online, so you may have heard of me online social at Aly Pain. I have online programs which I offer daily support. I think this parenting thing is super hard. And we're having to change some things that were normal for us for a lot of reasons, which I'll get into. I don't want anyone to feel alone in that process. I think parenting is hard enough. What makes it harder is because it is so full of shame and judgment. That's not at all a space that I want to create. So I believe in walking through a process with parents, with moms, so they feel fully supported. I get to do that serving a global audience. I think I've served parents from 9 different countries now. So my private community is in Facebook and all my programs are online, available at any time. And I do a lot of speaking to teachers, to parent PAC committees, parent associations, high schools, also now late elementary because parents are wanting to be more proactive. And I get to do podcast interviews like this with you.
Amazing. I got chills hearing you say that because it is really exciting that these conversations are happening, not just in this space. You know, it's not just moms going out of their way to find the podcast episodes and to educate themselves, but also like these conversations are being brought to people in society, I guess. Thinking about, giving presentations to parents at schools and taking a proactive approach that I don't think has been a thing in our history of our culture. So it's really exciting that that movement is happening and we're a part of it, and just really commend the work you do. It's important.
Thank you. It's my heart's work for sure.
Can you tell us about your journey to becoming a parent coach, what that looked like, and why you specifically do work with parents of teens?
Sure. So I came from a very well-meaning and loving, yet normally very dysfunctional home. And I knew as a teenager that this wasn't right. My parents are not evil. No, they're not broken. They're highly intelligent. It was parenting of the day. But I knew this wasn't right. And I knew exactly what wasn't right, but I had no voice. I felt very powerless. There was nothing I could do to stop what was happening around me. I didn't know how that was going to happen. But what I did find out really quick is that I was going to need decades of therapy. Decades to get here. So I've done that. And I had the opportunity to go back to school in 2006 to become a certified life coach, and then went on to also become a trained and certified relationship systems coach, which is a fancy name for a group of people. A relationship system would be a family as well. Got into working with families, but also ending up doing some corporate work, a lot of creating better, healthier cultures. And then when the world went crazy and shut down, my phone rang off the hook. And I mean off the hook. I was sitting in my bedroom for 2 or 3 hours a day talking acquaintances. These weren't even people that I knew that well. They were people who knew my kids, who knew kind of me. And that I was getting these calls because all of a sudden their teenagers were home with them all day. Their spouses were home with them. And it was not going well. That was last week of March for us in 2020. And then there was a bit of a lull. And then when it was announced that schools were not going back in person, a lot of corporations, offices, industries were also going to be working virtually. My phone started ringing off the hook again. And I thought, maybe this is a sign. I should go back to primarily focusing on families, which is where my heart is and what I always wanted. That's why I went back to school. That's why I solidified my credentials to do what I do. So I did. I lost a lot of my in-person business and corporate stuff, which wasn't close to my heart anyway. So I spent days and hours sitting in an office rebuilding an entire business online to serve purely parents. And I chose parents of teens. I'll tell you a little bit more in a minute, because I think it is the worst. I think it is the worst way that parents are set up to fail. And so are teenagers, because the teenage brain fundamentally, it densifies. It actually grows. Okay. It's becoming like from a simple computing system to a far more complex computing system. It is densifying. For every, like, say, one neural pathway it had, it actually doesn't just add 9, it destroys the 1 because it was an immature brain. And now there's different gray matter and makes 10 more. Now, if you can imagine just for 1 second that your brain decided to destroy a bunch of neural pathways and just write a whole bunch more, can you imagine the psychological impact of that?
Yeah.
Nobody tells parents that this is happening to their teen. Where is the meeting? Like, I'm trying to bring some humor to it, but it literally, I will get on frothy at the mouth on a soapbox. It is wrong. It is wrong. It is wrong. It is wrong. Parenting is already hard enough. There's very little support about it. I don't know about anybody listening. I barely got 6 hours of training on how to get a creature out of my body and keep it alive for roughly 30 days. I most definitely did not have any warning that my once friendly, kind, generally respectful, compliant child was going to turn into a moody, selfish, negative, yelly poop head, and that somehow it's not their fault. They weren't doing it intentionally. They're not broken, and I didn't break them. Where was that memo? This is not okay. It is not okay. We are setting parents up to fail every single day. And worst of all, not only are parents and amazing, caring, courageous moms, because this does not have to do with love or intelligence, we are setting teenagers up to fail. And then we can't figure out why they can't get their crap together. Okay, but we have sex ed and we tell them what's going on in their body from the neck down. Who's telling them what's going to happen from the neck up? Oh yeah, by the way, your entire brain is going to create a whole new identity. And also you're going to increase your capacity for emotions 4.5 times, but you won't have the vocabulary to express any of it. So no big deal. What the is, nope, I will do this to my last breath. And on that, I swear there will be meetings in grade 4 and grade 5, a memo sent home, a 20-minute video, something that empowers parents, moms, and teenagers. So we don't need to keep perpetuating this horrific disconnection of emotional pain and distress on both parties. I'm going to take a breath, but yep, that's why I specifically work with teens, because it also is one of the most pivotal times of life. Mm-hmm. It's pretty hard to be the authentic parent you want to be, feeling calm and confident, not because everything's perfect, but feeling calm and confident, and that you know how to connect with your teen and maintain influence, which is key to mentoring your child, raising a responsible, respectful human being. But when they hate you because you breathed wrong, how's that supposed to happen?
Yeah, everything you're saying just shows so much of how there's kind of these cycles that are perpetuated and not just over generations, but really
No,
like in the years of raising
culturally.
children, where,
Yeah.
yeah, we get like the messages that you should be doing a good job at this. And if you were doing a good job at this, your child would be a certain way and blah, 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 blah. And if
Mm,
they are disrespectful, if they are struggling in these ways that they probably will struggle because they are a teenager and their brain is doing this certain thing, then there's so much blame, but there's no support. And
mm-mm.
you can't get it right because you don't know how to get it right. And you don't even know what getting it right would even look like. Like it's going to be
Exactly.
chaotic. It's going to be challenging. It's not going to be perfect. For moms, that is something that happens the whole time, right? But
Hmm.
specifically, coming from a background in education and the way that we as a society blame parents for certain things that maybe they could have more control or influence over. But the problem doesn't necessarily stem from the parents doing a bad job. And I think there's just so many conversations we can be having about that. And
Hmm.
it's exciting for me as somebody who is so passionate about making changes for moms and passionate about making
Hmm.
the world a better place by making these changes for moms and empowering
Hmm.
moms to see
Hmm.
somebody get up on that soapbox and raise your voice and say, this matters. So I just really commend you again for the work you're doing and for making sure that this is something that we know about and are prepared for, because that's really the way that we can do our best as moms, as people in this society, raising humans, raising the next generation and for
Hmm.
ourselves, because we deserve to feel like we're good enough. We deserve to feel like we're not constantly failing just because things are hard.
Absolutely. Again, the lack of support. So, my part of that kind of a very large comment, the lack of
Mhm.
support, my till my last breath moment of that is providing the science behind why literally it's like overnight, if they flip like a switch, the hormone hijack, parents, especially moms who are already so under scrutiny and judged and shamed. And you, like, I just love what you said. You can't get it right. I am so tired of that. You cannot blame, shame, and crap all over someone who was never trained. Parents of teens are not trained on what it even means to be a teen. So all we believe is because your teenager is now perhaps bigger or as tall as you, or, they can use a toilet, get themselves dressed, put food in their mouth. They obviously are just a miniature adult. But that's a common assumption. They're
Mhm.
mature now, but their brain is fundamentally and wildly not a child, and it is not an adult. And so we are setting parents up to fail, and we are setting teens up to fail. And I've had it. I will just keep doing this for as long as it takes because moms deserve that.
Yeah, I definitely want to get into some of the societal factors and specific challenges and all of that. But before we do, I'm curious if there's anything thinking about your own upbringing and your own teenage years that has been influential in, I guess, informing the work you do and informing this passion.
Absolutely. So, as I said, I had a difficult time at home. I struggled. Again, I can't say this enough. My parents are not evil. They are not stupid. They are not broken. I was raised in a very strict environment that was parenting of the day. And my experience was I needed to perform. So that means grades, sports, my body, physical container, everything needed to be pleasing and performance ready, or there was significant punishment, consequences, emotional berating, and some physical pain. So perform, 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 be perfect. That was the message I received. That was my experience. So by 12 years old, I was using my babysitting money to ride my bike to the mall and buy diet pills. I was already thin as a stick. That started an eating disorder that lasted about 14 years. By 13, I was drinking heavily on weekends, and that continued for about 4 years. If you can name it, I probably did it. And I was, although a gifted student, I was a straight A student, athletic, award winning student. That was all part of the performance basis, even though it did come easily to me until it didn't. And knowing what we know now, I also had ADHD, but that wasn't a thing. And especially for young girls, that was a diagnosis reserved for boys because they were looking for the you can't sit still. Whereas what we know now is that a lot of young girls were overlooked on that because we take the hyperactivity internalized as anxiety in our brain, but are very culturally programmed to be compliant and can sit still. And because I was smart, that I was kicked out of the gifted program because I couldn't concentrate, couldn't pay attention. But nobody thought anything of that. So in grade 11, school got harder and harder for me. I have a photographic memory, but that doesn't mean I was learning anything, and I couldn't really apply the knowledge. So that worked for a time till it didn't work. And I was put in advanced academic classes. And in grade 10, I was hanging on by my fingernails, but made it through. And because my entire identity was being the smart kid, and that was safe. That's how I stayed safe at home. So it was the thing I liked about me. It was one of the few things that was affirmed about me. That wasn't something negative or I should fix or was bad or terrible. So no, I didn't go and ask for help. And this is one of the misnomers that parents don't understand, is this is why smart kids struggle in school, because they actually tend to have higher levels of anxiety, lower levels of resilience and confidence, because it becomes a construct, an identity. So challenging that is a problem. So grade 11, 3 weeks in, I couldn't do it. I just knew this wasn't going to work. And I had no resilience. I had no study skills. My confidence was just crumbling under the weight of continued things at home. And so I don't think I showed up to a single Monday in school in grade 11. And I was failing out of courses. And in that winter, I attempted suicide. And voila, that did not work. But I decided I never wanted to feel that way again. And so I failed part of grade 11, limped my way through. And on my own, with no support, I spent that summer asking myself a lot of deep questions like, okay, if you don't want to feel this way again, then what was working? Go back to what did work. And then why did the things you were using didn't work? And ironically, my aunt gave me an agenda. And what I realized is I was trying to hold too much in my brain. So I started writing things out. And although it was a bit of a facade Band-Aid fix, I managed to graduate as the top academic and athletic student in my high school, which again, all the wheels fell off when I went to university and then started my decades of therapy. So the teen years were the most painful for me. And I think, again, my parents were set up to fail too. They didn't know what they didn't know. I have very personal experience in living with ADHD and anxiety, kind of as my bent of ADHD. I have had some situational depression, but I don't struggle with physiological. They are different. And I think that teens are wildly misunderstood and unsupported. And I don't think that being a parent of teen needs to be so hard. And I don't think being a teen needs to be so hard. And it's actually not. Yes, there's a lot of psychological nuances we could spend days talking about, but just simply making that journey more enjoyable, calmer, safer, more connected for both parties is actually not really complicated if we would just pay attention to it and start empowering and supporting moms. It's in my heart, and I knew it then, and it is a privilege to get to do this now.
Yeah, there's so much in that story. First of all, that I can relate to. I was diagnosed with ADHD earlier this year, and I'm like, yep, that sounds about right. Like the performance and
Yes,
the doing well and internalizing all the anxiety, all the shame, and
yes,
just like believing that if as long as I was good, as long as I was performing this good student, this good girl role, that it would all be okay. And it gets to a point
mm-hmm.
where you can't just keep performing to some external factor when there's so much going on inside. And so I
Mm-hmm.
think knowing
Mm-hmm.
that there are so many ways in which our brains are not all the same, and whether
Mm-hmm.
that's a diagnosis or not,
Mm-hmm.
understanding that those are factors we have to consider in raising our own children and what expectations we put on them is so huge. And then, kind of, the other part of that is this kind of acknowledgement that parenting has changed so much, and what we know about parenting
Yes,
has changed, the research,
yes.
what we're able to apply, how our
Mm-hmm.
society functions, how school functions. Not all of that has necessarily changed to catch up with what we know, and
True.
how we can look back and say it's not necessarily our parents' faults or
No.
their parents' faults or their parents'
Mm-mm.
faults for doing things a certain way, but also validate that it wasn't right.
Yeah,
Right? It's like
yeah.
we can say that was not the way that this should have been handled, and they may not have known better. And there's still, again, those patterns are still continuing. We don't know the quote best way to do things if we're not educated, if we're not taught how to do it, if we haven't healed our own things that allow us to take that and implement it. And so I think there's so much in there that can be validating and empowering, and also like it is okay. It's okay if things have not been perfect in your life. It's okay if you have not been the perfect parent, because
There
that's not
isn't
the
one.
goal. Yeah.
And also, there's no perfect child.
No.
So let's let that go.
Just let it go.
Hmm.
Yeah, it's deconstructing those beliefs that are very, very deeply ingrained in our
Yes.
culture. And even
Yes.
if we know that that's not attainable, it's not real, it still is what we're holding ourselves to and what we're holding our kids to.
Yes.
I think it would be helpful to kind of explicitly lay out the differences in how generations prior have been parented, how we were probably parented, the kind of patterns that do continue that have been shown not to be the best for anyone. Specifically, what are we talking about there, so that we can start to identify, right? Because we can't change something if we can't even see it in the first place.
Right, right. And this is really hard to hear sometimes because, of course, parenting is one of the most emotionally charged topics. We hold it
Hmm.
very close to our hearts. It's very tied to our ego. And that does also come from how you were raised. So in 1920 something, Dr. John B. Watson, he's the father of behavioralism. He was a psychologist and a teacher in the United States. And he founded the beliefs that raising a good child meant you absolutely did not pay attention to emotions. They were messy and uncontrollable. You paid attention purely to behavior, and the best and fastest way to create behavior change was to elicit fear. He actually hung babies by the leg over rats to program them to be terrified of rats. Yes,
I'm going
that
to
is
pause you.
true.
You said in the 1920s.
That's correct.
So think about that. That's 100 years ago. That's, I mean, I'm thinking, like, I think my great grandma was born in the 19 teens.
Yes, but let me translate this out a
Yes.
few decades,
Yes.
okay?
Okay.
So thankfully, his methods have not only been deemed as unethical, his grandchildren speak out on it often, that it has also been deemed as most likely to create emotional pain and, if not, trauma.
Yeah.
Now, his methods were standard until the mid 1960s. So now put that together. Is that your grandparents? Is that your parents
Yeah.
that were raised kind of then? Okay. So just because that was disproven in the 1960s, we're still only a generation if away from that. And
Yeah.
so between 1920 and 1960, we also hit the industrialized era. We hit the era of like, you got to get a degree. Like it was just very linear. You went to school, you got good grades, you got a degree, you got a good job. Things were simpler. It was a simpler time. It was a very different economy. It was a very different population base. The world was a different place. What ended up happening in that time frame because of changes in the world was we became, and actually this is also, you can go way back with this one, we became obsessed with performance obsessed. Now way back, that was your ticket to survival, because if you could learn a trade or a skill, you would be less likely to be impoverished for the rest of your life. You could make a living wage and literally not live on the streets. Okay, so like 1910s, I can't go back. So this whole performance, your credibility came from your skills and your knowledge. That's gone back way. And it was
Hmm.
actually a survival thing. Like you needed your kids to do that so that they could buy food. So then add on top of Dr. John B. Watson's work of how we should ignore emotions, and then the industrialized era, which glorified even degrees and education. And at the time, there was room in universities for people. You could get in with a B average. So we've continued to become more and more obsessed with performance, external performance, your human value, which is probably how you were raised. It's exactly what I explained how I was raised. My value as a human being was based on the physical container that I occupied and how I expressed that, hair, dress, everything. The grades I got, how I was able to speak, and the athletics I could do, the whatever. Like if I couldn't do that, I risked, well, harm. I'll just leave it at that. But I risked disconnection with my parents and was no longer deemed worthy of approval, affection,
Hmm.
affirmation. In fact, my parents would withdraw because I wasn't being appropriate then. What's come out of that is, I'm going to break this down into the 4 C's for you, okay? Is it an obsession with compliance and capability? We are freaking obsessed with raising children who are compliant, as in, do not be an autonomous human and have your own thoughts or feelings. Do exactly what I say when I say, do what culture asks, do what your teachers ask, do not ask questions, just do it. So this very twisted version of respect, which is actually not respect. And then capability, like learn the skills, be good around the house, be helpful, learn skills, get a good job. Cool. What we know is that has raised generations of people who are wildly insecure because our entire worth was based on what is outside of us, not at all acknowledging any of our emotions or our internal value. So we are more burnt out than ever because our only value comes from what we can achieve. And that's super awesome as a parent. We also were raised in environments where you as a young child were held responsible for your parents' feelings. So that probably sounded like, oh, don't you do that, your mother's going to be so angry. Or oh, if your father finds out about that, you will be so. So you were sent the message consistently that your behavior as a 5, 6, 8-year-old controlled an adult's emotions. No biggie. Then you also were taught that your behavior and actions also were directly responsible for their behavior. Your parents weren't responsible for their own behavior, and whether they went unhinged and hit you or punished you or whatever, you were. Okay, that's the definition of codependence. So we have generations of wildly codependent people, said with all love and compassion, also putting myself in that very large bucket. Come join me, because now you're a parent and you believe you are responsible for your teenager's feelings. I don't know if you've ever tried to cheer a teenager up when you breathe the wrong way, but good luck to you on that one. Sweet Jesus, I'll tell you, you better tape your eyebrows on because they're going to get blown back and burnt off. Like teenagers on an emotional roller coaster, you can't stop. And so this need to constantly fix them and cheer them up, raising half humans who are only allowed to experience half of the human experience, only the pleasurable, pleasing, sparkly, shiny, friendly ones, learn to internalize, abandon, deny, and suppress the other necessary half of the human experience. And now we also have a massive mental health crisis because as a parent with a teenager, just in case you don't know, they're a giant hot mess express with their emotions. Again, they're increasing their emotional capacity by 4.5 times, yet don't have the intellectual to filter them, express them, words for them, nothing. If you're uncomfortable with uncomfortable emotions, parenting a teen, well, just call me, because it's going to get uncomfortable and they're not going to care. So do you see how all these things, this is where we've come from. Now, I'm going to go back to the 4 C's for a second. We've moved from what we know scientifically in research, which by the way, this is decades and decades old. It's not new. This is just taking so long because behavioralism feels safe because I can see behavior and I can use a lot of tools to directly control it. Mm-hmm. Some of you may agree with, some of you may not, but I can do that. Emotions? Oh, no, sir. Specifically, if I was not raised to have the capacity to be around really challenging emotions, but only the pleasurable ones, how the heck am I supposed to do that? So that's why this new sort of, I'm going to put this in quotes, gentle parenting or whatever, I do not aspire to that term. All of my work I call respectful parenting because no doormats, thank you. So the 4 C's, we went from compliance and capability being the obsession and avoiding compassion, okay, which is humanity, kindness. No one's perfect, and neither am I. And allowing like the softness that is required in the face of failure, which, by the way, scientifically proven, you cannot learn anything. Our brain cannot learn anything until you fail first. Think of your toddler learning to walk. That is actually the norm, and that there's a demonstration right there of the messiness of learning, and failing is required to succeed. So we're trying to include now compassion and then connection, and connection being the deeper level of compassion, but also for oneself. As I just said, we were raised to disconnect from ourselves. We were raised to be hyper aware of our parents out of survival and safety, but not know how to connect with them. Nor did they know how to connect with us. They were not taught that. So connection, we know, healthy, rich connection is life-saving. We know that the price of loneliness and not being connected to ourselves and others over a lifetime is the equivalent of smoking a pack of cigarettes a day on our cardiac health. And it actually begins to erode our organs. Like, we were intended to connect. So what the science is showing is, yes, we need capability and we need compliance. Sure. But we need it to be healthy in balance with connection and compassion. And that is actually what is raising the respectful, responsible human being that you want, who doesn't think they hate you every minute of the day, maybe just a few of them, and actually does want to hear what you have to say because you have maintained a level of influence. Yet you also understand that their developing brain is required to fail in order to succeed, that control actually will get you way worse situations, but this is how we've arrived at parenting. So I get the people who do what they know, which God bless you, all of you. So using control for compliance ultimately, which doesn't work because you're ignoring, there's no room for emotion. There's a perfectionist level of accountability, which is not possible, zero room for emotion. Or the people who say, I'm not going to do that. I'm a cycle breaker. I'm going to do the exact opposite. Well, guess what? That's a focus on compassion and connection, which is wonderful because there's emotions, except there is no structure. And in that, you are required to abdicate your authority. And both of them are running from fear. The first two C's is fear of losing control. The second one is fear of conflict. Neither one works. But the problem is, we came to it with one. We think the opposite must be better. It doesn't work either. And the truth is, it's a balance of the two in the middle, which is where my work stands in all the research and the science-backed evidence that I call respectful parenting, where there is a healthy combination of the four.
Yeah, there's so much in there. And obviously, it's one of those things, like, you've dedicated your work to this. It's the things where, like, you can take one piece and run and explore and dig
Yeah.
into that. It's such an interconnected just beast that we're tackling as parents, navigating our children, ourselves, and the world that we live in and everything that we come to this role with. And so I think acknowledging the complexities, acknowledging it's not about getting this right, but it's about really trying to understand the factors that we're coming to this with. And
Yes.
knowing that knowledge is important in that, being able to actually, like, have the capacity to process the emotions and implement and do all the things is important in that. And there's opportunity, there's support for making this experience something that is just easier on everyone and has a better outcome in the end and is less something to feel ashamed about. And all the things that we've talked about, there are ways to counteract that and ways to just exist as a mother who is raising children, raising teens in a way that
Mhm.
feels better.
Yes. And here's the irony that I want to say. I've never met a parent who doesn't deeply love
Mhm.
and care for their child. Like, I've never met one. I think if you're listening, you're one of them. Like, I just have never met one.
Yeah.
And I know you're doing the very best you can. It's that it's so freaking isolating being in such a shame filled environment where somehow parenting is now conflated with morality.
Mhm.
And so, like, I mean, if you're not a perfect parent, like, you're just immoral and wildly failing. It's so deeply unfair. I often, I deal with a lot of parents who have neurodivergent kids who have not been told half of the current research to even begin to understand their child's brain. My oldest is autistic, ADHD, generalized anxiety, and major depressive disorder, none of which I was also told. And I knew at 6 months that kid was different. But
Mhm.
the diagnosis way back then, he's 23 now, was just that he had anxiety. Really? So I did all that myself. I raised him myself. Aside from my training and certification, I dove into books and research to try and understand his brain. And I was telling teachers, and I'm still doing that. And it's not because teachers are bad or wrong. It's because I happen to live in this world. I'm neurodiverse myself. I have a neurodiverse child. I've struggled with mental health. And so a lot of parents are not even being told, they're being told, oh, your kid's got ADHD, but now you just got to get stricter.
Mhm.
Well, like, what? That's not current at all. Letting go of the current, knowing that you're just doing the very best you can. And I know that I would never question that, but being willing to say, maybe It doesn't have to be this hard. And maybe I can actually raise the same child that I'm trying to raise. Because I know that's what every parent wants. Parents, they just want their child to reach their potential and find success and be a responsible, respectful human. What if there was a way to do that without so much emotional pain or price, with a calmer household, feeling more confident, knowing you're already an amazing parent, even when you question yourself, and that's normal, and that your child is not a bad apple or broken. So what if you could get the outcome you wanted, but it meant you might need to question how you got here, not because it's about intelligence, but because we were all set up in an outdated model. So you can still have exactly what you want. The thing is, it triggers all of our fear and our ego, which is, I understand that, like when parents are coming to me, because they probably tried a lot of things, they're doing what the doctor's telling them, they're doing what the school's telling them, what their friends or family, it's not working, or it just doesn't feel right. Like this isn't the parent I want to be. This doesn't feel right. The risk is our egos is letting go of the only construct we know. And that's why I do this. I do daily support, because I acknowledge there's all this shift in your brain going on. And I don't take it lightly. I've done it. I had to do it myself, while you're also trying to shift your relationship with your teen. And so there's this twofold. Oh, and by the way, everything we already mentioned is hard being a mom. So I did it alone. I had to figure out a lot of that crap on my own. I learned a lot along the way, even though I already was coaching moms. I never want it to be that hard or lonely. I don't think it has to be.
Yeah. You're standing with moms and giving that sense of support in something that historically there has been zero support in. And that is really beautiful. Aly, this conversation has been incredible. There's so many pieces here that we could just run with, but for the purpose of the podcast episode, we'll start wrapping up the conversation. And as we do, there's something that I really love asking guests at the end of episodes, because I am a champion of moms giving themselves permission to take care of themselves. And I really think self-care is such an important part of the puzzle. It's not the answer to everything, but it's important that we know that taking care of ourselves matters. And so I love to ask guests, what do you do to take care of yourself? And what advice do you have for moms just to make sure that they are practicing self-care regularly?
Yes. I love this question, because it is very often that we as moms put ourselves last. We think we're a bucket that somehow is going to be filled by something, someone, somewhere else, yet we have a hole in the bottom. And then we get really mad and disappointed when we see our teenagers making seemingly odd choices about their own self-care and not looking after themselves. That begs some questions. So one of the ways, and I will say for free, okay, this whole self-care thing, so foreign to me. It was, I was terrible. I was awful at it for years, because I also did all the things, thinking that made me more moral or a better mom, like, putting everyone else before me. That's just crap. Okay. So let's just let go of that right now. I have always maintained, I should be careful of always, for the most part, I've maintained physical health. So I've worked out. My kids see me work out. When they were little, they had to sit on the couch, and that was their half hour of TV time. I was on the carpet. I was the shark, and that was the ocean. And if you step in there, I get to tickle you. And the couch was the boat, and you don't move off the boat, because I couldn't afford childcare. I couldn't afford a membership at a gym. So my kids have seen me maintain, whether it was, Zumba, I was a Zumba instructor, or, going to the gym at some point when I could afford that, going for walks. They've seen me do that. They've seen me maintain relatively healthy eating, but also not perfect. Like, sure, let's have a bag of licorice. Who cares? Like, whatever, we're camping. And I think more and more now, as I am getting better and still healing my own nervous system, they see me do less. They see me be still, or not need to constantly be productive, which comes from performative thinking. They see me say no to more. They see me say, no, sir, you are an adult and you are capable of that. I'm happy to help you. No, I won't do that for you. I love you. Set way more boundaries around my time and where I spend it, and not be a yes person, because my value does not come from how many yeses I give. My value actually comes from how many no's I give to other people and how many yeses I give to myself. So it's been a huge learning curve for me. But for me, body movement of some kind. I now only do yoga. I can't even imagine sitting in a Zumba class. If someone turned on loud music, I'd punch them. I just want quiet and slow where I'm at right now. And physical health, really getting clear on what foods and what work for me, not to be, please, not to be skinny, not to be like, no, so that I feel good in
Mhm.
my brain and in my body. So that is two of the big things I hold very sacred. And yes, I'm still working on regular journaling and meditation and all the things. And it's kind of haphazard, but I'm working on it.
I love it. Always a work in progress. And I think that is an important piece of it, right? It's not
Right.
getting the self care and having it and we're good
Mm,
to go. It's constantly relearning what we need and trying our best to make sure that we are giving that to ourselves and just being intentional about it the whole way through. Beautiful.
because then you're modeling it for your
Yep.
teenager.
It's important. It is important. And they are watching.
Oh,
They're
they will
taking
do
it
as you
in.
do. They will do as you do, not as you say.
Yep.
So if you're not doing self-care, you don't get to crap on them for eating 7-Eleven junk food all day and then, not exercising or anything. And not saying that you're doing that, but to the degree you
Totally.
prioritize your self-care in saying no and they watch you do it, they will do what you do.
Yes, they will. Amazing conversation. Where can listeners find you? I know you've spoken about your services and things like that, but how can they connect?
Best place is my website, alypain.com, ALYPAIN.com. Under the resource tab, I've got a ton of free stuff so you can jump in and get started right now. I also do have, of course, my online programs, which are more in depth, transformational, daily support. And online, you can find me at Aly Pain, ALYPAIN, Instagram, TikTok, probably the best two places.
Amazing. We'll have it all linked in the show notes too, so that it is super easy to find all the resources you might need, especially if you are raising teenagers right now or kids that are younger than teenagers, and you'll get there eventually. So
Start now.
start now.
All of the content that I have works. This is a secret. Don't tell anybody this. So this is between you and me. And if you're listening, you can't tell any of your friends. All of my content also works in your marriage and if your children are younger because it's based in science. But if you start now, it makes it easier. So there, just a little secret.
I love it. Amazing. Thank you so much, Aly, for being here. There's so much in this conversation that is so useful, so insightful. So thank you for sharing it all with us.
Thank you so much for having me. And thank you for listening. Again, you are worthy. Don't let anybody ever tell you differently.
100%. Really appreciate everybody tuning in. I hope that there's something from this episode that you can take and really hold in your heart, maybe implement in your own life. You are worthy, Mama.